Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 3rd of April, 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson.
Sounds like you haven't been taking your flu shots, Brian.
Well, possibly a little bit of a cough lurking in the background, so apologies if any of that breaks into the live programme today. Well, we will be talking, of course, about Russia. I think there's a bit of Skripal coming up.
Yes.
So let's put our viewers and listeners into the right frame of mind by just reminding ourselves that Melanie Shaw is still in prison. Melanie Shaw, of course, the very brave lady, the whistleblower, child abuse whistleblower from Beechwood Children's Home in Nottingham, who dared to speak out about the abuse of children. She talked about children being brutalised at the Beechwood home, in the Beechwood home. She also maintains that children were murdered. She talks about links between the Nottingham children's homes where abuse was taking place and London, and in particular there is mention of political circles. Where is Melanie? Well, she's been brutalised in UK prisons. She's been in now nearly 22 months, I think it is. She spent at least 18, possibly 19 months of that time in solitary confinement. And remember that solitary confinement is defined as torture by the United Nations. So this is the state of the country under Conservative Theresa May, David Cameron exactly the same. One rule for nations overseas. Totally different rule for people in UK, particularly if they dare start to point a finger at the British government and its cosy relationship with child abuse. Now, luckily, some very good people have been staying on the case with Melanie, and a number of letters have been sent out. This one here is to David Gauke MP at the Ministry of Justice. The letter says, I'm still waiting for a response to my letter to you of the 3rd of January regarding Melanie's mistreatment by the UK justice system. In case it's gone astray, a copy is enclosed. Also enclosed is an open letter to Luke Sargent, Director of Women's Prisons, disputing the application of the Data Protection Act in a manner which challenges our basic freedoms under the common law. I trust I will now finally receive answers to the questions which I repeatedly posed without satisfaction to members of the government and the prison service. I would add that it is difficult to give any credit to the assurances of Melanie's safety and good health when she emerged from a previous imprisonment traumatised and on crutches after similar assurances had been given. So really excellent letter from this particular lady. And of course, the point she's making so pertinent, Mike, that when you ask questions of the British government, they simply don't bother to reply, and they certainly don't tell the truth. Let's have a look at this one. We'll just give you a flavour of this. This is basically part of a letter that's actually been sent through to Luke Sargent, the Director of Women's Prisons, but in it there's detail of the treatment of Melanie, the fact that she's been traumatised. She is still unaware of the exact charges that she's in prison for. She has no idea of her release date. So if you freeze that particular frame, you can read through the detail on that. And significantly, this letter moves on to the subject of common law. Under the common law, everyone is entitled to a public trial before a jury of their peers, with the offence for which they're being tried clearly stated. Only then can justice be seen to be done. Here's the key parts. Melanie was tried in secret, without a jury, and I understand without even being present in court herself. This was the miracle, Mike, of the Skype link, which unfortunately failed at the particular points that Melanie was starting to defend herself with some success. The precise nature of the crime for which she has been imprisoned for some 20 months, much of that time in solitary confinement, has never been made public, so that it is impossible to compare the sentence she's been given with those meted out to others for similar offences. The information I have repeatedly requested relates not merely to Melanie's case, therefore, but to the basic conduct of justice in this country, and to plead that such matters fall under the remit of the Data Protection Act. undermines confidence in the justice system itself. Are we now to be subjected to lettres de cachet by order of the executive? Isn't it fascinating that step by step members of the public are starting to identify that what is now forming in the United Kingdom is a fascist state, a communitarian state. And of course, we were talking last week about Theresa May's fusion initiative and pointing out the similarities with certain parts of it to effectively Hitler's enabling act. So serious stuff. If you want to have a look at the flippancy of the reply that comes back from the other side, apologise that this image is a little bit dark. It says, "Thank you for your letter addressed to Right Honourable Amber Rudd MP, dated the 12th of March 2018, regarding Melanie Shaw. As I am the Director of Women's Prisons, your letter has been forwarded to my office for response. As stated in my previous letters to yourself, due to the Data Protection Act, I am unable to confirm or discuss any details that relate to any person who may reside within any of the establishments that are within my remit." There's the gulag, Mike.
That is a spectacular perversion of the intent of the Data Protection Act. I can't put it any other way. The Data Protection Act is there to protect people's data. It's not there to place political prisoners behind.
Yeah.
So,
well, we assume it was, but of course, who was the Labour MP? Tony Blair. How could I forget Tony Blair, who said that one of his biggest regrets was the Freedom of Information Act, and of course that would be true because they're frightened of the truth coming to the surface.
Yes. Okay. Well, let's move on to the Skripal situation, and Russia's starting to hit back now. And while we've been on our extended weekend break, there's been a response to Boris Johnson from the Russians. He dared to cite Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment, in one of his bits of rhetoric. He said, "The wearying barrage of Russian lies, the torrent of obfuscation, rather like the beginning of Crime and Punishment, in the sense that we are all confident of the culprit. And the only question is whether he will confess or be caught." This is the rubbish that Boris was talking. So at the end of last week, Maria Zakharova hit back at Boris and said, "Unlike you, we read, love and know Dostoevsky." She said that she quoted from the same book. She said, "From 100 rabbits, you can't make a horse. 100 suspicions don't make a proof." And that's absolutely right. Yeah. She went on to say Tony Blair might play the role of Raskolnikov. Everyone knew there were no weapons in Iraq, and then he brought apologies. So the Russians hitting back pretty strongly, and we'll come on to that a little bit more in a second. She went on to announce over the weekend, and the Russians went on to announce that more British diplomats in Moscow to be expelled. The total now to be something over 50. So that I think the 50 number includes the 23 that have already left the country. So on Saturday, Maria Zakharova told Reuters that Britain would have to remove a total of something over 50 people from Russia. We've asked for parity. The Brits, she said, have 50 diplomats more than the Russians. So she said that will total a little over 50. But in the meantime, then, of course, the OPCW have had their samples of whatever it is that they've had samples of. Those are being investigated. And so the UK embassy for the Russian Federation has issued a series of questions on the Skripal case. This happened over the weekend. So the permanent representative of the Russian Federation to the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons has sent these questions. They ask, number one, what kind of assistance has London requested from the OPCW Technical Secretariat? Two, will the OPCW's Technical Secretariat, acting in accordance with the established procedure, share information with the Executive Council, including Russia, which the UK will provide to the OPCW's Technical Secretariat? they ask, has the UK provided the OPCW's Technical Secretariat with the current medical, legal or any other additional information regarding the British inquiry? Number 4 is, what exactly would the British like the OPCW's Technical Secretariat to confirm? The fact of the use of nerve gas, or that it was a type of nerve gas known as Novichok, according to the Western classification? What kind of data and material evidence have the British provided to the OPCW's Technical Secretariat in terms of samples, results of analysis of these samples, any other evidence? Who headed the OPCW's group of experts who visited Britain? Well, I asked them that question as well, and they absolutely said they were making no comment on this, whether they're prepared to answer the Russians or not. Well, we'll come on to that in 1 second. What specialists formed the group? How long did they work? With whom did they interact? They asked what procedure was used to collect samples. Was this carried out in compliance with the fundamental principles stipulated for OPCW investigations? That is the chain of custody. Which certified laboratories will analyse the samples? How much time does the OPCW's Technical Secretariat need to reach a conclusion? Has the OPCW's Technical Secretariat approved disclosure of the investigative material by the UK to EU countries? And they name France. And number 11 is, has France notified the OPCW's Technical Secretariat of its involvement in the technical assistance as requested by the UK? Has France provided its material on the investigation, if any, to the OPCW's Technical Secretariat? And can the OPCW's Technical Secretariat provide the French investigative material, if any, to Russia for perusal? And if not, why not? And this raised a question. Now, Brian, about half a dozen people have now asked me over the last couple of days, what has France got to do with this?
Yeah.
We'll come on to that in 1 second. So I asked the OPCW this morning if they had already replied to these questions, if they intended to reply, if the answers are publicly available. And their statement was that the OPCW is in the process of responding to the questions submitted by the Russian Federation. The answers are anticipated to be sent to the Russian Federation by the end of today. And that's sincerely from their public affairs directorate, or whatever they want to call themselves. So that was 13 questions for the OPCW on the Skripal case. The embassy of the Russian Federation went on to ask 10 questions of the French. So let's just briefly have a look at those. They said, on what grounds did France become involved in the technical side of the United Kingdom's investigation of the incident in Salisbury? Has France officially notified the OPCW of its involvement? What evidence did the UK hand over to France as part of the technical side of the investigation? Were French specialists present when biological samples were collected from Sergei and Yulia Skripal? Did French specialists conduct their own tests of the biological samples? Based on which attributes did the French specialists conclude that the chemical warfare agent was of the Novichok type? What expert knowledge does France have in studying chemical warfare agents of this type or its analogues? Based on which attributes was the alleged Russian origin of the substance used in Salisbury established by French specialists? Does France have control samples of the Novichok chemical warfare agent? Have samples of the chemical warfare agent of this type or its analogues been developed in France? And if so, for what purpose? So those questions have been asked by the French, and the question asked of the French by the Russians. And as I say, the question is, why have the French been brought into this? Or the Germans don't seem to have been brought into this.
The key bit here, Mike, is the silence, the utter silence in British mainstream media. Are we to believe that British mainstream media have simply been unaware, completely unaware, that we've had French assistance, I'll use that genteel term, for the Skripal case? Is this the reality, that mainstream media totally unaware?
Well, they're either unaware or they're hiding this information.
Yeah.
And if they're hiding this information, this has pretty serious implications for the British mainstream media. But of course, it's not just the British mainstream media, because a couple of the questions that I was asked about this were coming from people the colleagues that I have in the United States. So the United States media wasn't covering this French involvement either. So this seems to be almost a global ban. Is it a D notice that's been put on this information? Well, I have no idea.
We don't know, but when I read those questions, what came into my mind was David Ellis's warnings from Strategic Defence Initiatives, because of course David was saying watch out for what is going on in the background. Brexit of course is a smokescreen. What is happening rapidly is the fusion of the UK and the French nuclear capability, and that includes everything to do with the waste from the power stations, and this of course leads us on to the fact that we've got a complete collaboration between UK and France, which even goes into nuclear matters, and it would appear now that we're going into chemical nerve agents.
Well, let's have a look, because let's remember that it was on the 18th of January this year that the British and the French were pushing out this type of thing, this little video clip from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. The UK and France are close partners as members of NATO, the G7 and G20. But what was this about? Well, of course, it was about the UK-France summit, which took place, as I say, in Sandhurst this year on the 18th of January. Well, a number of things came out of that, not least some unified ministries. So if you remember, this was announced. Theresa May said it is incumbent upon us to demonstrate leadership in meeting the great challenges of our time and upholding the international rules-based system. Well, what was interesting was that while this meeting was covered in the mainstream press, following the meeting there was very, very little coverage of what the result was. The government pushed out this page, the UK-France summit, and documents. And if we look through at the scope of this, we're looking at security and defence, protecting our internal security, cyber and digital security, shared solutions, whatever that is, declaration of intent regarding nuclear, and a whole bunch of stuff, as you said, shared futures. So let's just run through this a little bit. The Defence Secretary, as we know, joined Theresa May. She joined the Chancellor of the Exchequer and also Boris Johnson's Foreign Secretary at Sandhurst on the 18th of January for the UK-France summit. This was all about building on the 2010 Lancaster House Treaties, which was the 50-year Defence Pact, which was organised through the Franco-British Council. We'll come on to that in 1 second. The UK will work with France, they said, and other European partners to support the development of the proposed European Intervention Initiative. The European Intervention Initiative will be a defence cooperation framework that aims to improve operational planning and coordination of military deployments. They also announced the importance of the ability of the UK's defence industry to continue to engage in European defence. So the UK and France are going to be working very closely on the military-industrial complex side of things. The creation of a UK-France Defence Ministerial Council. In fact, they announced two ministerial dialogues, ministerial councils. One was the Defence Ministerial Council and one was on foreign policy and development. What else did they announce? They announced that the UK and France commit to sustain the international order, which our countries have helped to build together over the last 70 years, to explore a joint approach to promoting international tax transparency, to establish a joint task force on low-carbon future, to work together on carbon pricing, to set a new strategic genomic medicine partnership, to launch a business and innovation council, to hold a summit of mayors and other leaders of city regions, a data innovation twinning initiative, a revitalised Entente Cordiale programme for master's students, and the recently launched Young Leaders programme. They said that they have consistently shown both the will and the ability to promote and defend our interests and support global peace and stability and the rules-based international system. This common purpose and capability is at the heart of the 2010 Lancaster House Treaties. So they're going to strengthen maritime cooperation, our navies operating increasingly closely. In this context, we have agreed on the continuing importance of United Kingdom defence and the stability of the multilateral order, including its contribution to European defence and security. So in that one statement, Brian, any nonsense from Theresa May over the last couple of weeks, which there has been, that Britain is not getting involved in European defence, is a lie because she has signed this document, one of the documents that was agreed at the Franco-British summit. We have agreed on the continuing importance of United Kingdom defence on the stability of the multilateral order, including its contribution to European defence and security.
Yep.
So Britain's contribution will be maintained. We stress the need to further develop the emergence of shared strategic culture between European states. And on Russia, they said the United Kingdom and France share a common assessment of Russia's more assertive foreign and defence policy, which goes hand in hand with various concerning forms of strategic intimidation, including the use of disinformation, malicious cyber activity, political subversion. The United Kingdom and France will act together to address security challenges it could raise. So that is why we are acting together on the Skripal case. And I think it's very astute of the Russian government to push out these 10 questions to the French, because it highlights the fact that this is going on, because the mainstream media hasn't highlighted the fact that this is going on.
No. So absolutely no discussion or debate in Westminster at all about the fact we are now committed with no knowledge to this partnership across all these levels of government with the French.
This is a very important point, Brian, because they are, you listen to the people in mainstream politics from Labour, Tory and from Lib Dem and from UKIP and everybody else, they're all talking parliamentary sovereignty. There is no parliamentary sovereignty because sovereignty has been stolen by this cabal in the Cabinet Office. They push through the Lancaster House treaties, they're pushing through this latest Franco-British summit, the treaties that come out of that, without any parliamentary scrutiny, as you say, and without any parliamentary approval. Where's Parliament?
Puppet show, Mike. It's a puppet show. Sometimes they decide to put a show on, other times they don't even bother to put the show on. Who's really driving it? This is the deep state government, which is making the decisions. It doesn't matter what parties in power. It is the deep state that is making the decisions behind the scenes. And the fact that we now don't even bother to tell the British public that under the lie of Brexit, we are to be made in a, well, I don't know what it is. It's a new country, really, which is now the Franco-British country, headed up by Macron and Theresa May. They didn't bother to tell us. And now it's got to the level where these two countries can simply point a finger at Russia and say, you did X, Y, and Z, with no evidence being presented to that same public again. Immensely dangerous.
And we'll just end by mentioning, of course, the Franco-British Council, the NGO think tank, whatever they want to call themselves, which is behind much of the negotiations which took place in the run-up to the 2010 Lancaster House treaties between France and Britain. Well, they were holding their 2018 Franco-British Defence Conference during March at some point. We don't know what date it was actually took place because it's by invitation only, and they haven't published a date. They said that they would publish details on the website after that event had happened. They haven't done that, and we just better remind ourselves of the types of organisations that are involved with the Franco-British Council, and so this is a sort of merging between government and private sector. We've got EDF in there alongside government agencies on both sides of the channel. So this agenda moves on apace with no scrutiny from the mainstream press, who should at this point really just be ashamed of themselves.
Ashamed of themselves. I will say that we have been contacted actually over the weekend by a couple of members of mainstream press who are interested in our comment on some of these events going on. So once again, we're starting to see that people in the mainstream press are paying attention to certainly what the UK column is having to say, and we are very happy to reply to them and provide information. And of course, where confidentiality is required, we're going to honour that confidentiality because some of these people are now working in very dangerous positions within the mainstream media. Well, what's the latest smokescreen? And it has to be anti-Semitism. And of course, we can expect the BBC to take the lead on this. So BBC is not investigating the British government's lies over the Skripal case. Instead, it focuses on something different and highly emotive. And here we have the headline: Labour anti-Semitism row. Corbyn faces criticism over Judas event. If you have a look at other comments on the internet, you'll see that aside from the BBC, The Guardian and other mainstream papers are also wading onto the Let's Get Corbyn bandwagon. So we've labelled this free speech for all in UK, except when you criticise Zionism. And I think this is an important subtlety that many people miss. Very often it's labelled against the Jewish community, but the key thing is Zionism. It's when you criticise Zionism that the problem starts. And that criticism applies even if you're Jewish, because the key part of this story is that Mr. Corbyn went and spent some time with Judas, which is itself a Jewish organisation. So it isn't a question that this is about being anti-Jewish. No. This is a whole question about being critical of Zionism and the policies of the Zionist Jewish state. So you can find some interesting tweets in the BBC article. This is John Woodcock MP. This is deliberately baiting the mainstream Jewish community days after they pleaded with him to tackle anti-Semitism. So here's the spin on it. It's anti-Semitic. No, it's not. This is about Jewish people criticising Zionism. And he must know that meeting them now will give his members the message that the group's extreme views are okay. Interesting extreme views, because having visited the website myself, what I see is Jewish people starting to query all sorts of things, including activities against the Palestinians, the behaviour of the Israeli government and more. But of course people can see this for themselves. Here we've got the campaign against anti-Semitism, plenty of free advertising by the BBC. And it's hard to imagine how this duplicitous man can claim to be remedying anti-Semitism within the Labour Party, because that nasty man is going to listen to the views of other Jewish people. It's amazing, isn't it? It doesn't matter if you're Jewish, you're not allowed to criticise Zionism. We've got Angela Smith MP. Corbyn's attendance at the Judas Sabre reads as a blatant dismissal of the case made for tackling anti-Semitism. This comes under the methinks thou dost protest too much rule, Mike, doesn't it? Screaming at Corbyn for going and having a look. But of course, let's remember the power of the Jewish lobby itself. And I think it's appropriate to bring on screen here Labour Friends of Israel. Israel has huge power within the Labour Party. At the bottom of the list on the left, you can actually see John Woodcock MP himself. So one of the people laying into Corbyn at the moment is himself a friend of Israel. So that's interesting. I had to take a small video of this clip in order to let you see some of the numbers. Left-hand side of the screen, it just goes on and on and on. All of these people effectively saying that they are there to support the interests of the state of Israel. Is that over and above anything that the Labour Party is trying to do for the people of Great Britain? I don't know, but we can at least ask the question. Encourage people to look at this material themselves. Make up your own mind as to what's going on. But there we are, Labour Friends of Israel. If we hop over to the other side, we better come on to the Conservatives. And this is fantastic because we've got some pretty heavy statements here. I'm not sure if you can read that one, Mike. I'm struggling a bit. The distance there.
I can't see that.
Well, basically, it's Gavin Williamson who's busy saying, I might be able to call up on another screen, but he's saying that our defence arrangements with the Israelis is absolutely excellent. We'll bring in this other headline from the Conservative Friends of Israel website, and this is the Middle East minister. And he's saying that basically our loyalty to Israel is unshakable. This is the language of David Cameron.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter what the state of Israel does, the British government is going to support it. If this was Italy or if this was Greece or Iceland, I think people in in UK would start to be asking the right questions. But the problem is many people too frightened to ask the question because it's Israel. So UK Column will ask that question. And let's remember that it's the Conservatives that, without any dialogue with the public at all, any dialogue in Westminster, announced that they were integrating UK intelligence services, GCHQ, through to Israeli specialist intelligence services. And this was also going to be spread through the universities, because, of course, this is what a lot of the early development work of new intelligence equipment and specialised techniques comes from the universities. So here it was all linked in with Israel, and we even had British police going to Israel for specialist training. So what was the organisation that's caused the problem? Well, here's Judas. I'm going to say that most of what I've read on the website I found very interesting because they are clearly questioning the Jewish state. But I'm always slightly suspicious of websites where I can't see instantly who the people are and I can't contact them. So you've got to go through this rather bland contact page and put down what you want before somebody's going to actually come forward. I don't like this, but it may be they have to protect themselves from the Jewish state itself. So here we are, Radical Jewish Voices. There's some very interesting poems and comments on this site, but this is part of the detail here. And it says that they got going after a document was found at the back of a shop. Now, a lot of this seems to me to be tongue-in-cheek. If anybody knows this organisation well, please could you give us some help and support on this. I think there's a lot of tongue-in-cheek comment on this site, but they are clearly exposing things they don't like. They're clearly poking fun at the Jewish state, and I presume that's what's causing part of the trouble. So there we are. You can have a look at that by freezing it on screen, or preferably go and have a look at it yourself.
And we should probably just remind everybody what David Scott was mentioning about Gilad Atzmon at the end of last week.
Yes.
Who, of course, is under attack from his own community for his criticism of Israel and Zionism as well. So it's not just Judas that's receiving attacks on this basis, or Jeremy Corbyn. It's also other people with it that are outspoken in the wrong directions as far as that community is concerned. And
we say people who are Jewish themselves. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned the Minister of State for the Middle East, Alistair Burt, a second ago. Why was Jeremy Corbyn at this Judas meeting? It was because of the deaths at Gaza over the weekend. Alistair Burt says that he's appalled by the deaths and injuries on the Israel-Gaza border on Friday. Remember, this is the man who says his belief in Israel is unshakable, echoing David Cameron. Yeah. There is an urgent need, he said, to establish the facts, including why such a volume of live fire was used and what role Hamas played in the violence. But the most important thing is to ensure that there's no repeat of what happened, with all sides committing to peaceful protest, restraint and international law. This issue cannot just be managed over time. We need a political process to deliver a two-state solution, urgent action to improve the economic and humanitarian situation in Gaza, including easing of restrictions by Israel and Egypt, and Palestinian reconciliation based on full adherence to the quartet principles by Hamas. He wasn't just speaking about Israel and Palestine over the weekend, over the last couple of days. He was also talking about Yemen. And he didn't say this particular comment, but this is what he would have said if he had been asked. But he would have said, in recent months, my colleagues have sold billions of pounds of munitions to Saudi Arabia, which has been successfully dropped on Yemen. But what he did say was that today I announced a £170 million package of new UK funding to provide life-saving food, medicine, clean water and sanitation to millions of desperate Yemenis. And so what he didn't say then was, this is merely the cost of doing business. But that is his attitude. I am absolutely certain that is his attitude. Now, the news today is that several children are among those killed in a strike in the Yemeni port of Hodeidah. yesterday. According to the United Nations, this is one of the deadliest attacks on minors, they say, for several years. The United Nations has verified the killing of several children in an attack in the coastal city of Hadida in western Yemen. Many children are reported missing, as the injured and killed are still being pulled out from the rubble. And they described the attack, as I say, as one of the deadliest attacks on children since the conflict in Yemen escalated in March 2015. But that's okay. Because Alistair Burt is sending £170 million of aid to the country, in contrast to the billions of pounds in business that's being done selling these bombs and munitions to Saudi Arabia in the first place. This man should be ashamed of himself.
Should be. I doubt if he is, Mike.
No.
Well, let's move across to the police. And we're going to say thank you very much to the viewer who sent this article through to us. And they said, what is this article by the BBC? I think probably part of their questioning would be that the BBC is not to be trusted on many subjects. But here was the headline: the uniform and the rules attract autistic people to join the police. Now, we're just going to show you some of the comments that come out in this article. We're being very measured here because we're really not sure what the BBC is trying to do. But let's just have a look at some of the comments a policeman makes about his job. He said, "I don't particularly like driving down this road because I notice everything." He dislikes walking through the throngs of chattering tourists in the picturesque city centre, but it's nothing he can't handle. Now, he's saying he doesn't like doing it because that is one of the difficulties he faces as an autistic person. We go on here with number 2. "I'm wearing a uniform. I'm in a police car. Why do these people think it's okay to break the law in front of me?" And this particular line is highlighting the fact that many autistic people are very happy to follow a well-defined path of rules. They find it difficult to see those rules being broken, and he's really echoing that in the statement. We've got this one: "Even now, colleagues joke about all this stuff around me affecting me when it doesn't need to. I get really exercised about it." So he's admitting that some of the things he's required to do as a policeman are causing him problems because of his autism. We go on through: "Every single day, I have to tell myself to let stuff like that go. I just have to breathe and not think about it." So, to my mind, this man's clearly admitting that he comes under a particular stress doing particular things because of the autism. What does the BBC, oh, beg your pardon, where do we go on to there? Sorry, I'll have to catch up.
It says law enforcement attracts people who are on the spectrum, he says.
Yeah.
They like the uniform. You get to wear the same thing every day and you get to enforce the rules.
Right. So is this an advert to actually recruit people into the police, autistic people into the police? If it is, that is interesting, because what is clearly stated in this article is that the condition of autism itself can cause some quite significant problems to the police officer concerned. However, we're going to make sure that we say at the end that, of course, attributes of autism, like being very good with detail and routines, mean that these people can be very successful in certain areas. So at the end, I'm good at going into difficult situations where emotions are running high. I can go in and look at cold facts, and I have self-confidence. I always know the right thing to do. And this is really playing on the fact that autistic people who can find emotions difficult to grasp and take on, he can go into a very emotional situation and be quite clinically analytical in getting to the bottom of what's going on. So we've taken a look through that article very carefully. But what is actually going on here? Is it the case that the BBC is working on a line that what we need are to recruit more autistic police? If so, that seems to be quite a cynical use of people with autism. And of course, we've seen the BBC betray people with disabilities in other areas, where we now know that across the country at the moment, people with severe disabilities are unable to look after themselves or feed themselves or get jobs because the state is clamping down on people with disabilities. But there's a wall of silence from the BBC. So we're asking for some help on this one as well. What is the BBC doing? And maybe we could say to our audience, what do you think about the implications of this particular article? But let's move on to this, which is Devon and Cornwall Police. I think this is the Nazi death's head, Mike, unless I'm mistaken. This is Devon and Cornwall Police Cyber Unit, and they've got very excited all of a sudden about a number of issues. Let's have a look at something that they've posted up here. So it says, want to see what data Google and Facebook hold about you? Read this. So suddenly we've got the local police force adopting what appears to be government policy and saying you should be looking at what these big companies are doing with your data. But of course, this is the same Devon and Cornwall Police. I think I'm right in saying this. It was a very long time ago, but it was identified that Devon and Cornwall Police over 2 years had hoovered up, I think it was 53,000 emails, which they were not entitled to have. So Devon and Cornwall Police, what data do you actually hold on the public? And is it your job to be pointing a finger at Google and Facebook unless you've got the evidence?
Well, the fusion doctrine, of course, would say yes, Brian.
Yep.
There's no more to say on that.
This is it. And have a look at this, because they're not only sticking a finger in the pie in UK, we've now got Devon and Cornwall Police promoting US Department of State political protocol. So the US Department of State wants to ask visa applicants to provide details on the social media accounts they've used in the past 5 years, as well as telephone numbers, email addresses, and international travel during this period. This is all advertising, yes, Mike, isn't it? Is this the job of Devon and Cornwall Police Cyber Unit? And isn't it surprising that whilst we've got people's homes being stolen through fraud in the Plymouth area, Julia Langmaid's case we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks, the same Devon and Cornwall Police seem unable to do anything at all?
Well, the government has announced a competition, you'll be glad to know, to discover which is going to be the first 5G city in the country. They're going to create a 5G city in a multi-million-pound trial of new high-speed connectivity to pave the way for future rollout of 5G across the UK. Because, you know, without 5G, we can't be sharing data, big data in the kinds of big amounts that we would otherwise want to. This is the Urban Connected Communities Project, a key part of the industrial strategy. And the next step in the government's 5G testbed and trials programme, and it's going to develop large-scale citywide testbed for wireless 5G. They say that it's going to have support a variety of initiatives, including doctors and other healthcare professionals using real-time video consultation and remote treatment for those less able to travel, making traffic jams and disjointed journeys a thing of the past. It's going to revolutionise the way visitors experience tourist venues, and it's going to contribute to the maintenance of manufacturing assembly lines through the use of robotics and augmented reality. So this is all fantastic stuff. So it's going to come from £200 million assigned so far to develop 5G technologies as part of a £1 billion investment in next generation digital infrastructure. And of course, it's being driven through the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport. So they are seeking expressions of interest from local or combined authorities with a coverage area in the region of 500,000 people. Well, there you go. Expressions of interest can be made up until the 5th of June, and then they're going to work with the selected local authority to choose delivery partners. And one of those delivery partners undoubtedly will be some form of tree surgeons company while they cut down all the trees. Because as Ian Crane has been pointing out in his recent live streams on YouTube and Facebook, 5G does not seem to be capable of working terribly well in a sort of city streets that have lots of trees, and particularly when the trees and the leaves get wet.
Yeah.
So the best thing to do is just to cut them all down.
Yeah. Incredible or not.
Yes.
Right. Well, as we end, just let's remind ourselves that Theresa May's now got very excited about the NHS. She says she's unveiling a massive shake-up of NHS funding. Many people had come back and asked her whether that meant the NHS would get more money. She didn't actually want to answer that. So big shake-up of funding. Does it mean more money? Well, I'm not going to tell you that. So there we are. But what we said is coming is the breakup of the NHS and the complete privatisation as soon as possible. We also, a couple of days ago, had this article, Caring for the NHS by Tax. So there was, it's being proposed, there's a whole new raft of taxation in order to protect the NHS. So where does that take us? Well, Sarah Wollaston, one of the local Plymouth area MPs, tweeting out 90 MPs, including 21 select committee chairs, wrote to the PM last week calling for action. We need a whole system approach, Mike, to the NHS social care and public health funding that looks at what it really needs now and into the long term and what actually delivers it. Mm-hmm. So we're going into whole systems. This is not just a question of the NHS, everything to be linked together, and then we're going to look at how that works.
That would be the fusion doctrine again?
That would be fusion doctrine. And I'm going to admit to our viewers and listeners, my sin is that I haven't got my glasses with me in the studio. You can have a look at this letter on screen, but essentially this is the letter that's gone through to the Prime Minister. I'll bring you on to this second page here. This is what interested me. In the wake of the LIBOR scandal, the government set up a special select committee of both Houses of Parliament. The Banking Commission, chaired by Andrew Thierry MP, commanded the support of both front benches, drew on considerable cross-party expertise and was appropriately resourced. This model has several advantages over a royal commission, including the ability to build support in Parliament in a timely fashion. By contrast, the last Royal Commission on Long-Term Care of the Elderly, which reported in 1999, was cumbersome and made little difference. Our constituents cannot afford another policy failure on social care or health, and this would also have serious political ramifications. We propose that a Parliamentary Commission on Health and Care is set up to mark the 70th anniversary of the NHS. Do you think that's sort of suggesting that they should let bankers run this special commission, Mike?
No, don't know.
Looking for solutions, we should do it on the same lines as the Banking Commission. It's just a thought. I have to say, I think that the Tories are trying to get the system privatised as soon as possible. We'll end on the note that this is just the reason that we've gone for our NHS conference. So May the 12th, the Albert Hall in Nottingham. And more details will be coming out this week about our speakers, really exceptional group of people who've been doing so much to get the real truth out about what's been happening, not only in the NHS, but wider care system, and really dynamic people. I think this is going to be quite an event. And we understand that, intriguingly, at least one other organisation interested in the NHS has decided to hold an event in Nottingham on Saturday the 12th of May. What an amazing coincidence.
What a
Mike.
coincidence, yes.
So there we are. If you haven't already booked your ticket for that conference, can I encourage you to do so? Getting an early booking helps us. We're interested, of course, in the numbers. Tickets are now starting to move. This is going to be not just a very special event. There has never been an event like this on the NHS before. So if you haven't got a ticket, get onto the UK Column website and please make a booking. That's it for today. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.